Okay. Hello, everybody. I first want to say my name is Renee Bourgeois. I'm with the John Humphrey Center for Peace and Human Rights. I'm up here in Edmonton in Treaty 6 territory. Really excited to have 4 candidates on today to talk about the issue of living wage and just labor. So I'm going to pass it off to my colleague Marco, who's going to introduce himself as well and give you some context about what brought us here today, and then we'll dive right into things. So Marco, over to you.
Hello, thanks for joining us today. And this is part of a project that John Humphrey Migrante and an organization called AWARE had in the last year. My name is Marco. I'm from an organization called Migrante, which is a migrants advocacy organization. So during the shift workshop across Alberta, from North Alberta in Fort Mac to Lethbridge, we had workshops on issues of the community, and we also asked the participants on what do they think or what would they want the federal government to do, and some of which are creating just transition fund to promote zero carbon economy, creating opportunities for people with disability by developing an entrepreneurship program, and something like creating checks and balance in law to ensure access to remedy and accountability around labor, and build independent spaces for labor to seek remedy to issue in the workplace. We're hoping to have you, the candidates, spend at least 3 minutes, or spend 3 minutes, not more. And my colleague Renee will just hit that mute button. On what's your perspective on the issue? And our issue today is around just labor and the living wage.
So just to, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge and thank those that were able to join us today. We have Kristina Bowman from Yellowhead with the NDP. We have Elizabeth Thomson from Medicine Hat-Warner-Cardston with the NDP as well. We have Barbara Nichols with the People's Party of Canada, Edmonton, Griesbach. And then Stephnie Watson from Green Party in Lethbridge. So it's nice to have you all. I just have a couple more housekeeping things, and then we'll jump into things. But in planning these town halls, we kind of were non-discriminatory. We reached out to all candidates, all political parties, to kind of engage people in this conversation, because I think at the end of the day, in spirit of true democracy and freedom of political affiliation, I think we need to have these spaces where we all know we're invested in this country. We all care, and I know I could see Marco and I would say that we're really committed to creating spaces where we can have some of the more challenging conversations in a constructive manner. So just to start us off though, I just wanted to maybe do a quick round of introductions before we jump into the conversation. So I was hoping maybe we could just go around and have each of you introduce yourself and maybe tell us a little bit about what made you want to run for the federal election. Why don't we start with Elizabeth? You've been on the longest, so why don't we start with you and share a little bit?
Oh gosh, okay. So I'm Elizabeth Thomson. I'm the NDP candidate for Medicine Hat-Cardston-Warner. I was born and raised in Medicine Hat. I have a Bachelor of Arts in Women's Studies and Human Rights, a Bachelor of Law, and a Master's of Law in International Human Rights and International Criminal Law. So when I got the email about this town hall, I was very excited about it because human rights is kind of my specialization. Right now I work at Samus Immigration, which is a refugee resettlement agency in Medicine Hat. And I decided to run for a couple of reasons. People started asking me if I was going to run when the provincial election happened. And I was saying, no, got a lot going on in my life. I work 2 jobs, I can't do it. And it got to a point where all of my friends and family were saying, well, I don't know who to vote for. Because in Medicine Hat, our candidates got announced relatively late. the Liberal candidate in this riding didn't get announced until halfway through the election. So all of my friends and family were saying, well, there's no NDP candidate, there's no Liberal candidate, we're not going to vote Conservative or PPC, and we're not going to vote Green. What do I do? And I thought, well, if at the very least I can be that person that people can vote for, just so that they have an option, then that's what I wanted to do. But also, when I was growing up in Medicine Hat is quite right-wing, and I felt when I was growing up that I didn't have anyone to look up to, any mentors. So I wanted to be that person that, if anything else, at least when I go in and talk and I go into the schools and talk about the elections, that at least there'll be someone for those young girls to look up to. And I've had that amazing opportunity to have teenagers come up to me since the election started and say, I'm such a big fan of you, and I don't understand why I have fans, but they're a fan of me and that they want to be just like me, and that makes me feel like I'm helping the future. That's why I'm running.
Thanks, Elizabeth. How about we move to Stephnie? Pass it over to you.
Sure, yeah, so Oki, bonjour, hello. Here in Lethbridge, I'm running my campaign on and would like to pay respect to the Siksika, Tape, and Métis 3 region, to their past, present, and future. And Oki is our new official greeting here in Lethbridge. So we're very happy to be moving forward in regards to our truth and reconciliation work. And that was a big part of why I chose to run in this area, is that similar to Elizabeth, there was people being like, I want to vote Green, but if we don't have a Green person, how can I do that? So I have a master's in environmental science. I've been working constantly with multiple levels of government for over a decade, dealing with environmental issues, but also the social issues that are intertwined with the environmental issues. I also am currently developing my own company in regards to that too. So it's all very personal, and also just making sure that we're having those discussions around these issues, because they impact everyone, whether they want to admit it's happening or not. Also being a queer candidate in Southern Alberta, and my pronouns are they, them, it's creating a accessibility and more of a platform for future queer candidates to come forward. So I'm also using my chance to run as a way to, and I'm recording it as well, as to the type of discrimination and stuff that we face running as a queer candidate in a riding like ours. And I'm hoping to be able to help share that with not just like my party, but with other parties and other potential people, candidates, so that they can know what to expect and how to mentally prepare themselves and be able to put into place resources so that we can get more representation running in these areas. Because like, I think a lot of people feel they want to see and have their voices heard, but they're afraid to step forward to run, or they feel they won't have the support. So I'm hoping to help lead the way in our area.
Thanks so much, Stephnie, for joining us. It's nice to have you. How about we move over to Barbara? Do you want to introduce, and what made you want to run for this election?
Well, thank you very much, Renee, and other candidates. I'm sort of in the same vein. I cannot stand watching what's been happening to my country. I hate seeing the fact that we're losing freedom of speech, that we have governments that are just spending and spending and spending, and there's very little accountability or responsibility in what they're doing. I'm running for a People's Party because we want to return to a constitutional government where our members of parliament are free to represent their constituents. And part of the issue we have right now is that the current political leaders can whip up a vote and then everybody has to vote the same way. And I don't think that's democracy. I really believe democracy is it's ruled by majority with respect to minority. And currently, I think a lot of what's happening at the federal level is that we're seeing ruled by minority, a few activist groups, and very little respect for majority. So we want to return to having fairness and respect. We want to see people have more personal responsibility. We're all treated equally as Canadians, and that we have that freedom of speech. So for me, that's crucial. I don't like to see a government that's operating on a lot of ideologies. I think we need to get back to some grassroots here, and we need to be able to balance budgets. We have tax reforms, and my background, simply put, is that I started out in educational psychology and did special education for a teacher for a number of years. I've owned my own international student exchange. My family, my husband and I have owned small renovation construction companies, so we know small business. I've been a business coach. I do a lot of advocacy work and negotiation. I think those are great skills to have as a member of parliament, trying to be the voice, for your people. And I recently returned to teaching adult ESL, and I've been working with newcomers to Canada and helping them to achieve levels so they can become responsible and citizens and enjoy all the greatness that we have in this country.
Great. Thanks for joining us, Barbara. It's nice to hear your voice.
You're welcome.
All right.
Thank you.
So now, Christine Bowman, how about you?
So my name is Christine Lynn Bowman. I use she, her pronouns. I'm running for the NDP Member of Parliament position for the Yellowhead riding, but I am based on Treaty 6 land in Edmonton, Alberta. And so my background leading up to my decision to run is that I've been a dedicated employee of almost 13 years now with Canada Post. And over the past few years, I've been increasing my involvement in my union, Canadian Union of Postal Workers, to the point that I now sit on every committee. I've been elected to the Edmonton District and Labour Council. I'm an elected alternate to the Alberta Federation of Labour Council. And in August, I was elected to be our Chief Shop Steward of Stations and Depots, which represents and serves roughly 1,200 members across Edmonton, Alberta. And through this increased involvement with my union and getting more involved with the EDLC and the AFL, I've really come to appreciate the role that politics plays in how it directly impacts how well my union functions, and not just my union, but unions federally across Canada as well as at provincial levels. And so that with that involvement, like over the last, for sure, year and a half, my life has just been taking a very political turn. And I've been reflecting lately on what that means to me. And I've come to understand that it's about the advocacy of our shrinking middle class, who is becoming our working poor, and our working poor is sliding into the impoverished. And so when the opportunity presented itself to run for the NDP with a party platform that is 100% about servicing the average everyday laborer Canadian, not those who have amassed personal wealth and not big corporations, I was absolutely thrilled at the opportunity to run. And so some interviews and some forums later, here I am.
Awesome. Okay, Marco, over to you.
Yeah. Hey, thank you for that awesome introduction. I'm just gonna try to, I guess, recap on the shift the agenda items that perhaps all of you, we're requesting all of you to talk a little bit about. So one is the creation of Just Transition Fund to promote zero carbon economy. These are agenda items that came out of workshops that we did. And also, how do you support that transition through training and funding? Also, how do you create opportunities for people with disability in your platform or when you're elected? And I guess lastly is how do you create checks and balance in the law, particularly labor law, and ensuring, having some kind of a accountability, whether that's employer or whatnot, and building independent spaces for labor on these issues. So let us know your thoughts. Perhaps we could start with Elizabeth.
You want me to cover all of that in 3 minutes?
Sure. As much as you can.
We'll engage in more.
Okay. Oh my gosh, that's a lot to cover in 3 minutes. So the NDP's platform is a lot about making sure that life is better for everyone. And most adults have jobs, and that's the way that most of us live our lives day to day, is going to work, and that's our main interaction. So obviously for the NDP, making sure that we have fair labor is pivotal. We've included in our platform making sure that we ban unpaid internships. We're planning on creating 300,000 good, clean energy jobs that will then help us transition away from the oil and gas industry and the boom and bust cycle that affects so many people in Alberta. It's not a way that I think many people enjoy living their life, boom and bust. And my husband works in the oil and gas industry, so it's very personal for me as well. We're also talking about making sure that there is fair access and free access to pharmacare, which would then help people live more barrier-free work lives, and improving income security programs so that people that can transition back into work. Don't know how long I've been talking for.
You're good. You're doing good. You still got 2 minutes.
Oh my gosh, I'm only talking for a minute. Okay. So one of the things we've been talking about, and I think for the NDP we've been talking about a lot, is pharmacare, but it's how pharmacare can actually affect everything else that we do. So if medication is free, then people don't have to really balance whether or not they can go to work, because they know that they have the medication that will make them be able to live their life day to day. I live with a disability that requires me to take very expensive medication, and there are days where, do I take my medication and I can maybe survive at work, or I can't really afford that pill today, I'm not going to go to work. And that's a balance that can be really, really difficult for people to achieve. But with free pharmacare, that wouldn't be an issue. Also, if anyone has benefits right now, benefits are paid, like your workplace benefits, some of it is paid for by your employer. So actually having free pharmacare, it takes that burden off of the employer and would allow the employer to then create more opportunities for their employees. And it would also ensure that people that are working full-time versus part-time or full-time versus contracts have fair wages, because there's not a disparity in what benefits they're necessarily receiving.
Okay. You have 30 seconds.
I'm done.
Good. Okay.
Perhaps Barbara could talk about what her thoughts on that.
Yeah. I would say that we have the same goals in mind, just a different way of getting there. Part of the problem with the NDP's plans are, where are these funds supposed to come from, and that's part of the issue. So from People's Party's perspective, we really believe that if we can just focus on the next 2 years, we don't have to be cutting services, but we need to focus on getting our budget balanced. And by doing that, we're going to be promoting small businesses and the business community by doing things, by equalizing our business tax would just be a straight 10%, which isn't putting too much pressure on most businesses, because there's so many other hidden taxes and stuff that are currently involved in the complications we face right now. And that would give employers opportunities to pay more in terms of wages, and fair wages, I would say, as well as it would give them more funds so that they can be involved in innovative technologies. And we all know that's how economies are stimulated, and they do better. The other thing that's really big for us is we feel Alberta's got such a bad deal right now with our equalization payments. And so by changing the situation in Alberta so that we are paying less for equalization, and we are seeing that the equalization payments we're paying are not continually contributing to another province's welfare situation, but are helping them to be productive and develop their resources, that's going to take less pressure. I mean, it is going to take less pressure off of Albertans in general, and so that we again have more of those funds that we can then put into things like fair employment terms and that kind of thing. And so we kind of do that as well. The other way we do that is we have a very simple tax reform system where people who are making under $15,000 a year have no taxes. People who are making $15,000 to $100,000 a year have 15% taxes, and everybody above that pays 25% taxes. And then the last thing in terms of tax reform in that area would also be we want to abolish capital gains taxes. So when people are selling property or they are selling businesses or anything, they're not having to pay a ridiculous amount of money, like up to 50%, back to the federal government, which is really not theirs. So that's I think, from a practical point of view, what we can do to help equalize things.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Perhaps we could hear from Stephnie Watson of the Green Party.
So for sure, Green Party, environment, zero emission economy is our main goal, along with making sure that we're moving everyone forward together. So speaking as a Green Party candidate, but also as an environmental professional with a master's in environmental science, we need to be meeting what the climate science is saying. And unfortunately, none of the other parties' climate plans really deal with that, which is why we're pushing for ours so hard. And it's not even just necessarily to elect the Greens in so we can get this going, but we're also approaching every party and being like, hey, we actually have a plan. It's been costed. It helps move everyone forward. It's the only one that meets the scientific targets that need to be met. The timeline has not changed at all. This is the same timeline that was presented over 20 years ago. It's just that we are now 20 years already into the future, and we still have had limited to no action on it. So with the Green Party plan, it's called Mission Possible. It's a 20-step plan. And what it is to holding our global climate to a 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature, because if we start above the 1850 baseline, because if we go past that, we're looking at dealing with dramatic changes and feedback loops that we don't even fully understand yet. We know that they are going to be worse than what we're seeing right now, though. And that impacts our economies, that impacts our health, it impacts our food security, it impacts our survivalship. So what our plans to do is to look at reducing and cutting carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, which are the three main components to the climate gases in our atmosphere that cause this issue, and down to 50% by 2030, and we'll be net zero emissions by 2050. This is in line with the UN Sustainable Development part. We have the transition in place for our workers as well, so that we can make sure that there is just transition for people. We also want to make sure that climate refugee status and increase in immigration is there to help the areas that are still going to be affected, and that unfortunately we're already committed to losing those land bases with lots of people on them. So we need to make sure that we're doing our part in helping those people by bringing them here or into other locations where they might be, along with our international agreements with the other countries. We also are looking at programs in place to help, such as free post-secondary education, so people can retrain faster as the changing market happens, because we're not only just having climate interruptions, we're also having AI interruptions in our workforce. And so we need to be dealing with that and planning for that as well.
30 seconds.
Yeah, lots to happen. And really we're trying to also bring in guaranteed livable income, because if you empower people, that allows them to walk away from unjust employment situations, and also other areas where they might be experiencing difficulties in their personal lives. So by having that along with the pharmacare and everything else, we're looking at this as a huge shift in our entire economy and society, which is what is needed and what a lot of us have been working forward to, not just under the Green Party though. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And Kristina Bowman from NDP Yellowhead.
So to expand on my other NDP counterpart in here, with the zero carbon emissions, our platform, we want to reinvigorate the auto industry in Canada, and a big part of that will be putting a lot of funding towards innovations in the zero emissions vehicle industry. When it comes to residential, industrial, commercial buildings, we want to be doing massive retrofits and all new construction. All buildings will need to be green energy sustainable by 2030. And we'd want to redirect a lot of the revenues from oil and gas, eliminating the subsidies. If an energy corridor to the east ends up going through, and if the TMX to the west ends up going through, there's also talk of doing a development to the north to Churchill. All of those revenues, or at least a good chunk of those revenues, we want to be investing into transitions in green and clean energy. We understand that this transition is unfortunately going to take time, and due to our current and previous governments, Canada Post is Canada is far, far, far behind in following along with this transition into green and clean energies. When it comes to opportunities for people with disabilities, part of our platform is to completely revamp EI, and one of the areas that we want to alter in the employment insurance is to put in some sort of a platform and a process for people with intermittent disabilities to be able to supplement their income with EI on the days when they're not able to work due to their disability, as well as there's not a specific policy to encourage this to go into people with disabilities, but we want to establish a requirement of employers to spend a minimum of 1% on training and development of employees. And I would like to see a collaboration with many associations and societies to find innovative solutions to encourage and expand on more areas for all Canadians to be able to work, because right now people with visible and invisible disabilities are extremely disadvantaged. And then when it comes to checks and balances in labor law and accountability, our NDP party was established by laborers for laborers. So we want to encourage the formation of unions. We want it easier for unions to be formed, which will then, again, being for laborers by laborers, we want to allow the process of negotiation to happen unimpeded. So as a postal worker, I understand very well what it's like to be legislated back to work and how corporations just take advantage of that, feeling like they don't actually have to negotiate fairly or justly, because they know that at the end of the day, after 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, the government is just going to step in and save them anyways. So with encouraging the formation of unions and allowing the process of negotiation and collective bargaining to happen unimpeded, that will help the labor movement regain power, and hopefully with the end goal that they create levels of secondary and tertiary leadership to be able to fairly negotiate their agreements, which addresses the needs of their union members. So at the end of the day, it's going to take government policy to be able to allow this process to happen, but eventually it should be a self-sustaining process where the employees now have an adequate way for them to advocate for their own needs, and a process by which the employers are not necessarily forced, but they're more encouraged to actually listen and take care of their employees' needs, rather than taking the perspective of how much more money can I cut from this and this and this to line our own pockets.
Thanks, Christine. So
Thank you.
So
Marco, when we get a chance, can I answer that one?
I think that's the next part of
yeah,
our conversation is for folks to ask each other questions and talk about their platform.
We have one question from audience. So yeah, Barbara, feel free to respond to that, and then we'll get to this other question after. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to say that sounds like a really great plan, and I'm just wondering if the unions have considered looking at things like co-ops. I know in my background in business, I've been a business coach, and what I do know is that businesses need to spend a lot more consideration in their budget for training. That's a very definite thing. You're saying 5%. I think it should be more like 10, even 12% in terms of what they're doing with training and allowances for people with visible vulnerabilities and minorities. And I also wanted to say I totally agree with you in the terms of wanting to have an unimpeded process. And People's Party would certainly 100% agree with that, because we really believe that more and more people need to be taking on personal responsibility and have less government intervention and less government control in their lives. So having co-ops having that kind of, having unions having that kind of organization would be an absolutely excellent idea. And the last thing I want to say about comments in terms of how far behind we are maybe with dealing with our carbon emissions, in many cases and circumstances, Canada is way, way ahead of where we are in terms of what we've taken care of our carbon footprint and dealing with our emissions. So those are just my comments, but I really like the idea of where you're going with the unions.
Does anybody else want to pick up and respond?
May I deal with that where Canada is statement? Yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot of misdirection and misinformation provided in especially Alberta in regards to where we stand compared to the rest of the world. And unfortunately, we haven't been taking as much action as we should be. We are a lot of talk, we are very little action. So when we hear a lot of comparisons to, well, what is China doing, or what is like Russia or Saudi Arabia or, India doing and stuff. And we actually have the documentation as well as the science reports from those countries, and they've done way more than we have with the populations that they have. And also because of the structure of their government, they're able to actually make those changes faster. Now, that's not necessarily always a good thing, because that can come at the cost of people's rights and stuff in some of these countries as well. So I'm not saying that the way that they're handling it is always necessarily the best way, but in regards to actually dealing with the climate crisis, they're way ahead of where we are. They've done a lot more than we have done. And the documentation, the research all shows that. So we really need to be moving the discussions to where the actual research and real information is. And we have to really kind of stop with the misdirections and misinformation, because that is the huge thing that is holding us back. And it's really great to see that our justice departments are starting to actually take a lot of that more into consideration. We are starting to see a lot more lawsuits over misinformation in that regard. And that kind of thing is going to be a very interesting thing in our social settings. And that's not necessarily, and we always hear the argument that that's the removal of free speech, but it's not the removal of free speech. It's that there are consequences to providing misinformation and misdirection.
Yeah, there definitely is, but I'm talking about carbon emissions. You're talking about a climate crisis. We're dealing with two different areas of facts here.
No, they're the same areas and same information.
Sorry, they're two different pools of information, and people need to check that out and vote for their own values.
Yeah.
Perhaps we could go to the audience question.
Yeah, so we have one quick question from the community that they wanted us to bring forward, and I'll read it out. If you need me to read it again, please just say. I'll try to do it slow. It's a few sentences. So, since the unemployment rate of people with developmental disabilities is at a staggering 80%, I want to know how each candidate will address this and what strategies they would implement to increase labor market participation in meaningful employment, so real work for real pay, for people with developmental disabilities. Does anybody feel called to jump onto that one? And
I can.
yeah, okay.
Yeah. So being someone who has is not neurotypical themselves and has disabilities themselves, I face that obstacle a bit, not nearly as much as some other people who have more severe diagnoses than myself. But the challenges are very much there and real. We can have all the education and experience behind us, but as soon as we bring up the fact that we might need accommodation within the workplace, all of a sudden our opportunities really drop. So how we deal with that is very difficult, because it's hard to prove that you weren't given that position, because that was like, they'll find another excuse, or they'll find another way to get remove you from the workforce, kind of thing, that way, if they find that, instead of trying to accommodate. And we do have a lot of legislation and stuff in place, but when you're in a smaller city or area than some of the other things, it's hard to be able to report stuff anonymously and to get things going, because they know who it is, right? Like we're such a small workforce in different areas, especially in smaller communities, that it's how do we go about protecting people and moving them forward. And I think like the co-op programs, being able to get people into the workplace and showing them, but also like, I think we need to be funding the nonprofits and stuff to go into workplaces and create work plans and stuff for these companies and help educate them. So it's not falling on the employees or the people with the disabilities necessarily to create that education, to create that explanation and stuff. It's already incorporated more. And I know that's something that we discussed here locally at one of our nonprofit forums and stuff, was that we have the solutions, we have the mechanisms and stuff in place. It's just the funding for our nonprofits to go out into and do that stuff is not there. So we really want to make sure that the funding is in place, that the funding that we're sending federally to provincial is actually being used by the provincial properly and being funneled not just to our two larger cities, but to the more remote areas and smaller cities, because that's really where we're seeing the effects the most. So.
Thanks for bringing that up. I think that's a really important point. I think this urban-rural discrepancies are something that we need to be super conscious of. Christine,
can I comment?
Yeah, go ahead, Barbara.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, yeah, I have children with disabilities, and like I said, again, from the other side of things, we educate our business owners to realize, like, once you take on a person in terms of you're doing training with them, it costs a lot more money from the money end of things to take on other people and continually retraining them. So to take the time and to have the resources in place to help those businesses with knowing how to accommodate and continue to offer. And I really 100% agree. We need to offer real work and real pay to everybody so that people have a really powerful sense of their purpose and confidence and you know, in their, you know, as people. And so I just want to say that I think we need a lot more education, and from the business side as well as from the and in the nonprofit sector as well, so that we can help doing a better job of accommodating people with disabilities and vulnerabilities in a work situation.
That's great. Thank you, Barb. Christine,
do you have
anything that you'd like to add to this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. So at this point in time, I haven't seen anything that with relation to specific policies that would impact this, but as a personal advocate for people, hopefully within the Yellowhead riding, which is incredibly rural space, like the biggest location within my riding is only about 8,000 people. Mm-hmm. So I would hope that part of the issue of people with visible and invisible disabilities would, again, partially be addressed with a national pharmacare program. I would also like to see the addition of in/visible disabilities to the list of equity-seeking groups. So right now that mostly includes women, Indigenous, and LGBTQIA2S+ people. But I would also like to see the addition of people with visible and invisible disabilities added to equity-seeking groups. I would like to see an increase in funding for nonprofits to all communities, but with a very special focus on rural areas for both educational campaigns and better support services, because there's a lot of areas of division among Canadians right now, and one of those is a huge division between rural areas and urban areas. Just as I had mentioned in my opening speech, that we need to have a focus on average Canadians instead of those who have amassed personal wealth or corporate wealth. A lot of the more disadvantaged people happen to be in rural spaces. So a lot of our focus needs to go in achieving the services for rural spaces that we need. And I would also hope that part of this issue might be addressed with the NDP goal of piloting living wage or universal wage projects.
Interesting. Yeah, this area around disability and employment, as well as entrepreneurship, was really loud in all of the conversations we had across the province, and this real desire to kind of address this issue of creating spaces where people can be employed, but also where people can take their own initiative and create their own businesses. So Elizabeth, how about you? What are your thoughts on this issue around employment? And
yeah, so for the NDPs, one of our first priorities is to make sure that we're upholding the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and really strengthening the Accessibility Act so that the protections are there, that if there's any issues that arise, that people have recourse to access, and making sure that there is the accessibility, and that partnering with employers to make sure that accessibility is not a hindrance or a barrier, making sure that we can partner with them to ensure that people can get meaningful employment. And I 100% agree, we need to be making sure that nonprofits are being funded appropriately and being funded so that they can do the work that they need to do, because nonprofits tend to be the experts in this area. The government is not necessarily the expert, it's the people that are on the ground. In Medicine Hat, we have an amazing organization called Core Association that do amazing work in this field. And when you brought up entrepreneurship, what I thought about immediately was about meeting people where they're at, and not just assuming that they want to do X job, that they have a desire to do a job. So let's find a way for them to get into that field that they want to get into. Another thing that the NDP has in our platform is creating a national autism strategy so that we can get national research, national best practices, needs-based services, and promoting employment and expanding housing options for people on the autism spectrum, so that those people can make sure that they have a full life that they deserve.
May I comment?
yeah, for sure.
Okay, I just wanted to say, right. I mean, I think the thing is that we want to be providing services and quality of services for all Canadians, regardless of what their minorities are, or their vulnerabilities are, or their ethnic relationships are, or anything like that. That is our goal. And there is only so much that we can do at the federal level, but what we can do is we can ensure that there are definite funds that are put into place by having a balanced budget doing these things, so these programs can go forth with these really, these really awesome ideas. And from our perspective at People's Party, we are the only ones who have a veterans platform, and we are the only ones who also have an Indigenous platform, because we want to make sure that these particular groups of people who have been overlooked so much by our society are starting to, be able to take on the personal responsibilities and not have the government being so intrusive or neglecting them or exploiting them or ignoring them. So, and with healthcare, I just wanted to say, we really want to see, because it is underneath the authority of the provincial government, we want to transfer the GST back to the provinces with the proviso that they will be acting responsibly and accountably with those funds, because they can do a better job at that level of partnering with research opportunities, pharmacare. All that thing can be done at the provincial level with the oversight of the federal, and not having so much of this bickering going on and fighting over responsibilities, which just costs taxpayers a lot of money.
Can I interject?
May I comment?
Oh, yeah, me too.
I'm just gonna go.
Okay, go for it, Elizabeth. And then
Okay. So to say that the other parties don't have veterans or Indigenous platforms or policies in their platforms is a bold-faced lie, because there's extensive, in the NDP platform, it is extensive, the amount of Indigenous platform issues that we have included, and veterans. My husband is a veteran. For me personally, it's very, very important for me, and it's included in our platform. And when you're talking about, you know, I always get asked as an NDP, or how are you going to pay for that? We've been very transparent in how we're going to pay for it: an ultra wealth tax, 1% tax on the ultra wealthy that are worth more than $20 million. But other parties that are promising a balanced budget, they're not saying how they're going to pay for that, what cuts they're going to make to balance that budget. So, I mean, I've read the other party platforms, so don't say that one party doesn't have something in their platform when it's clearly there.
Stephnie?
I was going to say the same thing. I've read the other party platforms as well, and I know that the NDP, the Liberals, the Greens, we all have Indigenous peoples as well as veterans in our platforms. We just have different ways of how we would like to deal with the situations, and a lot of them actually overlap as well. So once again, this is the issue that I was talking about earlier with the misinformation and misdirections. We really have to be more cognizant of that and respectful of the other people. Just to point out, if anyone wanted to know, our reconciliations with Indigenous peoples is the title in our platform, and it's on pages 11 till 16, and then we have a veteran part as well in our platform, and it's called Honoring Veterans, and it's on page 65 of our platform. So we very much do have this stuff, and then a lot of our overarching goals and platform is dealing with everyone, and specifying how some areas we have to give more support to, especially our Indigenous and immigrant people. So we also have a goal to balance the budget by 2024-2025, and we are also one of the few parties that had our platform fully costed by the Parliamentary Budget Officer. So yeah, like I said, we have a very extensive platform. We deal with a lot of different issues, as do all the other parties, and I think we need to be focusing on what each of our parties are bringing to the table and let people decide for themselves.
I would like to push
All right,
back
that's
a
what I'm
little bit.
going on.
Go ahead, Christine. I'm using different functions so that we can have clarity and everybody having the space to speak. So, Christine? Oh, wait.
I'd like to push back a little bit.
Now go ahead, sorry.
I'm looking for that. Sorry, where?
Christine.
A little bit to the People's Party of Canada. With regards to your goals of balancing the budget,
Right.
So for the person who's running for Yellowhead, Mr. Douglas Gallivan, he has said that the People's Party of Canada is going to be looking at basically doing whatever is necessary to balance the budget within 2 years, which means that there's going to be no extra spending. So when it comes to, you had mentioned like increasing funding for nonprofits with regards to persons with disabilities, I would like to challenge how you anticipate doing that if you're not going to be spending anything within 2 years. And with all due respect, these people and Canadians in general cannot wait 2 years to receive the services and access to the services that we so desperately need.
that is that maybe it's not. Okay, sorry. Fair enough. And I guess my answer to that, and I'm not sure about our candidate in Yellowhead, but basically what we want to do is a redistribution of funds in our country so that we are not needing to cut services, and so that by people, again, having better tax reforms and having more money in their pockets, will be able to be supporting these kinds of programs. So we expect more partnerships between the private sectors, the corporate sectors, and nonprofits, and we will certainly do what we can to foster that and encourage it.
Thank you for clarifying, because having heard that response from you, I don't feel like the Yellowhead People's Party of Canada representative did a good job in explaining that. So thank you for clarification.
Oh, absolutely, no problem. And I just wanted to say really quickly, if you guys can show me where your platform's on. I have comparison charts I've been fairly handing out to people saying to look at these comparisons, but I don't have like hundreds of pages I can give them, or 10 pages or something. So where are your platforms clearly stated with these comparison charts?
So your comparison chart is a partisan item that the People's Party has created. So
yep,
yeah.
So people can know fairly what to look across the spectrum of.
That's not a fair assessment. That's, you've created it. You can look at the CBC, which has neutral assessments, or you can go to each party's website and look at each party's platform. NDP.ca.
Yeah, but without doing a lot of looking, where do you find it? That's my question. I'm fairly asking that.
I think the party, I've been on doing the research with the party's platforms and their websites, and I think I found them all to be quite clear in being able to bring that stuff forward. So I think that's the trick, and Elizabeth as well. CBC is a great space. Marco, do you have any comments? We're kind of coming to the end. I want to wrap up. Would you have any comments before I wrap it up?
No, I think it would be awesome to just have a go around and have a final thoughts, particularly on our theme, which is just labor and living wage.
All right, so let's do that. Let's just do a quick kind of closing out of final thoughts on this issue around living wage. And I know kind of focusing on the content of this discussion. So does anybody feel like they want to go first? Open it up.
I'll do that.
Okay.
So in closing thoughts with the NDP platform, we want to establish a federal minimum wage of $15 an hour, but I personally do not feel Canada is so vast that there are parts of Canada that will be a livable wage, but there are parts of Canada, you look at Toronto, Ottawa, Vancouver, where that's absolutely not livable, and which is why we want to look at piloting living/universal wages projects to be able to supplement that. When it comes to the Canadian pension plan, no, that should not be taxable. You've spent your entire life paying into that. You've already been taxed on your income, which a portion of that goes into the CPP. And so in order to access those funds, you should not be penalized any further for that. And then I just want to wrap up on some more of the equal pay for equal work. A big part of that is that a lot of the immigrants that come to Canada that have backgrounds in engineering and nursing and doctors and surgeons, the Canadian legislation doesn't recognize that education and that experience right now. They could have been a doctor for 3 decades in their home country, and all of a sudden they immigrate to Canada, and that's not good enough. So with the NDP, we want to create acceptable, accessible, friendly, and efficient ways to be able to transfer that education and experience to Canada. And then I would just like to thank the listenership. I would like to thank Renee and Marco for putting this forum on. And I would like to thank my other 3 candidates for taking part.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christine. How about Barbara? Do you want to go next? Any final thoughts on your end?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I want to thank everybody too, because I mean, it really is all about freedom of speech. Is all about being able to have these kinds of discussions for sure. And I wanted to say, that, I totally agree. Seniors most definitely need to have some increase in their pensions. It's just not enough. And so at least we need to see that pensions are equal to or a little bit above inflation, definitely. We want to abolish capital gains, which would give seniors, baby boomers in particular, opportunities to not have to be paying extra taxes back to the government. We want to also, too, we think it's very important, and in my field, working with immigrants and working with newcomers with different skill levels and abilities and professions, certainly we need to recognize immigrants, and we want to make sure that newcomers to Canada and immigrants are recognized, and we should have, user-friendly ways of being able to see that their skill levels are recognized, and we definitely have places for employment for them. And the last thing I want to say is that would help us in Alberta tremendously is if we have the pipeline, because the pipeline would then give us the economy so we could get into supporting other kinds of alternate energy forms and equalization. We, again, would not have to be paying out so much, and interprovincial transfers, if we had free trade across our country, that would also tremendously help Albertans to have a better living wage and just labor. And thank you so much, you guys, for putting on this forum, and I hope you have a good day. And I really am trying to find where these platforms are, because I do want to look at them. So thanks very much.
Okay, maybe we can share them. Okay, Elizabeth, I'm going to pass the mic over to you.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay. So again, I'll reiterate, thank you for everyone for participating in this. Thank you for organizing this. I was really excited to participate in this. When it comes to, fair wage and labor in Alberta particularly, we all recognize that so much of the economy in Alberta is based on the oil and gas industry. We all recognize that. Like it or not, that's the way that it currently is. But that doesn't mean that's the way it needs to be forever. And in order to transition away from that and transition to clean energy options and to an economy that's not a boom-bust cycle, we need to make sure that we're retraining our workers, that we're fairly transitioning them away from oil and gas, and also training partners, because quite often, because of the nature of oil and gas industry, the workers are away from home, and quite often their partners then don't work. They stay home and take care of the kids, or they work very, very minor kind of part-time jobs. So then when they're transitioning away from that economy, we need to make sure that we're training the entire family on how to live within a green energy economy. And I agree that a living wage in Alberta is not necessarily a living wage in other places, but I'm a firm believer that there should not be a tiered wage within a region, that miners should be getting paid the same amount, and liquor servers should be getting paid the same amount as other people, because we're all doing the same. Our labor is worth something, and it should be paid fairly, and that there should be the options for people to join unions, and that unions should become more accessible to non-traditional sectors that currently don't access unions. So I have a lot of experience in the food and beverage industry, and that's one sector where there's a lot of abuse of labor, but there's no recourse and there's no access to unions. So that's a sector that really needs to see a transition to, more fair labor. And thank you all for everything today, and good luck to everyone on Monday.
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Okay, Stephnie, let's pass it over to you as the final.
Yeah, for sure. As with everyone else, thank you to Marco and Renee, and all the listeners, and to everyone else who participated in this. It's great to be able to discuss so many important things that we don't necessarily get to touch on in other forums, because everyone has topics and stuff. So it's nice to be able to really focus on this topic and to really be able to delve into it. For people who'd like to know more about the Green Party platform, it's greenparty.ca /platform. And you'll find it. And on there is also our platforming costing as well, which shows how and where we're paying for everything. It's 2 separate documents. So I do encourage people to go look at it, because it takes several it probably takes about an hour to scroll through, honestly. And if you're it takes a little longer to read like I do. It did take me, I think, like 2 hours to go through. So It is set up nicely in point form. Mostly, if you have reading issues, I definitely encourage just skipping to the bullet points. They do cover pretty much everything there too. And in regards to the $15 per hour wage, we definitely support that across country. We need to get rid of this, discrepancy of people being paid differently for minimum wages, and that would also help protect some of our foreign workers and immigration workers as well. And at the same time, we also need to be bringing in the guaranteed livable income so that and that's a regional based plan that we have for the Greens, because we know that living is different expenses depending on where you are in the country. And so we want to make sure that everyone's basic needs can be met. And that's really what's important, is that we're lifting up everyone, because we're only as strong as our weakest. So we need to be working together to move everyone forward, and we have to stop putting these barriers in place. If someone is experiencing something and they're vocalizing it, we need to stop taking so long in responding to that kind of stuff, and listen and come up with actionable plans.
Thank you so much. I know this is such a huge topic area and a lot to think about. I really appreciate, Stephnie, hearing about basic income, basic kind of guaranteed income. That was something that came across in the Calgary team quite loud. So I want to thank all four of you for coming and being part of this. It was we've recorded this session, so it's going to be up and posted live later this afternoon. So you can, share it out to you, so you can feel free to share it as well. And we just wish you all the best as we move forward. I do have to make a plug, of course, that we've been able to do this work thanks to the Catherine Donnelly Foundation in Toronto, as well as recently with some support from the Government of Canada's anti-racism program. So really, again, thank you all so much. Good luck in the next 4 days of canvassing, and we will be seeing you on the other side. So we wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
luck.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.
Bye.
All the best, everybody. All the best, everybody.
All the best.
Good luck.
Take care.
All the best.